Hello everyone, Ace here, and today's video is probably going to be a bit on the lengthy side, because today we're going to be talking about an absolutely atrocious NBC article that tries to defend a recent drag parade when its members were chanting, "We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children." Now, if you saw NBC advertise this article on Twitter, then you may have noticed that they tried to excuse this little chant by claiming that this chant has been made for years now, which is already not a good excuse. Nor is it a particularly good excuse to try to, quote, reclaim slurs by effectively arguing that yes, you are in fact a pedophile and that's somehow a good thing. However, as bad as the advertising is on Twitter, the actual article itself is worse. Much worse. But to understand why, we're going to have to go ahead and dive into it and take it apart piece by piece. And for those curious, the article in question is this one from Tyler Kincaid titled, "We're Coming for Your Children Chant at NYC Drag March Elicits Outrage, but activists say it's taken out of context." Organizers say the NYC Drag March is meant to be lighthearted and to poke fun at anti-LGBTQ sentiment. You know, by the performers doing their absolute best to make that sentiment seem completely legitimate and justifiable. And for the record, I do need to emphasize that it's not actually justifiable to hate the gays over this. This isn't a problem with gay people or trans people. This, however, is very much a problem with the activists, who, by the way, most are not gay nor trans. What they actually are is ideological extremists who disgustingly are using gay people and trans people as human shields to deflect criticism from their own rotten ideology. But with all of that said, let's now move on to the actual guts of the article itself, shall we? Which starts off by claiming, quote, "Over the weekend, a short video circulated widely on social media of an unidentified person at a New York City march during Pride festivities saying, 'We're coming for your children.' In the 21-second clip circulated by a right-wing web streamer channel, dozens of people march in the streets and are clearly heard chanting, 'We're here, we're queer, we're not going shopping.' But one voice that is louder than the crowd, it's not clear whose or whether the speaker was a member of the LGBTQ community, is heard saying at least twice, 'We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children.'" Already, this article has lied twice. First of all, the so-called right-winger who posted the video was Tim Pool, who in fact is not right-wing. Secondly, while there was indeed one person that started off saying, "We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children," it is worth noting that during the second time the chant was made, multiple people had joined in. And for those who want confirmation, I'm going to leave a link in the description below to the video itself so you can check it out for yourself if you should so desire. But the point I'm making is that 2 sentences in and we already have 2 lies. And that's not even counting the dishonest reporting that implies that this person was not representative of the members of the parade, which, by the way, the members of the parade go on to then defend in the article itself. So yeah, this article is going to start contradicting itself a fair bit, as are the people that this journalist interviewed. But before I spoil things too much, let's go ahead and carry on. As the article then goes on to say, quote, "To conservative pundits, activists, and lawmakers, the video confirmed the allegations they've levied in recent years that the LGBTQ community is grooming children." Except no, that's not who is actually being accused of being groomers. The people that individuals such as myself are accusing of being groomers are Marxists. And the reasons why include Marxist academics such as Wilhelm Reich and Mario Mieli arguing in their books Mass Psychology of Fascism and Towards a Gay Communism respectively in favor of sexualizing children as a means of supposedly combating fascism. Another reason that I argue that Marxism directly leads to groomers can be found in examples such as the Kentler experiment, where a Marxist psychologist known as Kentler, who by the way was inspired by Wilhelm Reich, deliberately put foster kids into the homes of pedophiles, once again to try to combat fascism, with predictably horrific results. I could also point to Marxists such as Michael Foucault, who famously tried to get the French government to legalize pedophilia, and then there's also Gail Rubin, who famously tried to defend pedophilia, specifically boy lovers as well, and some of her work including most famously her essay titled Thinking Sex, where she directly tried to compare pedophilia to homosexuality in order to try to defend pedophilia. And the list goes on and on. You can even look at some of the recent events as well, such as, for example, the Balenciaga scandal, and how so many Marxists lined up to try to defend Balenciaga. Now, for what it's worth, I do know that I have a few leftists that actually watch my channel, and view everything that I have just provided here with disgust, and understandably so. I would say that these self-described socialists, who find everything that I have mentioned absolutely disgusting, aren't quite as socialist as they might have once considered themselves. And I would say that Chant is the most famous example of what I'm trying to say here. As in, there are people who haven't actually become fully indoctrinated into Marxism, but have at least bought into the good-sounding notion of everyone having their basic needs met. Frankly, I believe that anyone that is in that particular camp will most likely simply turn against Marxism and any form of socialism built upon Marx as a foundation once they're made aware of this particular issue with the ideology. And I know this has been quite a bit of a tangent, but it is absolutely essential to knowing what's going on with the situation. People are not, nor should they be, blaming gay people for what's happening. Instead, the people who should be blamed are Marxists. Marxists who are very specifically using gay people and trans people as human shields, which if anything makes the Marxists in question all the more disgusting. All of this is to say that this little sentence is yet again another lie. But with that in mind, let's move on and see if there's any more things to rant about. As the article then goes on to say, quote, "But to Brian Griffin, the original organizer of the NYC Drag March, if that's the worst they heard, it's only because he wasn't there this year. Griffin said he chanted obscene things in the past, like 'kill, kill, kill, we're coming to kill the mayor,' and joked about pubic hair and sex toys during marches. People at the Drag March regularly sing 'God is a lesbian.'" So to be clear, the defense that one of the founding members of this parade has made is that he has personally sang worse things in the past, such as about how he's going to kill the mayor, as if that somehow makes what has been said currently any better. Fun fact, it does not. Moving on, the article then goes on to state, quote, "It's all just words," Griffin said. "It's all presented to fulfill their worst stereotypes of us." Remember when a few years back, far leftists were busy arguing that words are violence? Hell, remember a few months back when far leftists were arguing that the developers behind Hogwarts Legacy were unironically committing an act of genocide against trans people for making a video game? You don't get to sit there and claim that you think that words are just words after spending the better part of a decade arguing that everything is political and that words are violence. Anyways, getting back to the article, it then goes on to say, quote, "The Coming for Your Children chant has been used for years at Pride events, according to longtime march attendees and gay rights activists, who said it's one of many provocative expressions used to regain control of slurs against LGBTQ people. And in this case, they said, right-wing extremists are jumping on a single video to weaponize an out-of-context remark to further stigmatize the queer community." So first of all, I've already explained how this is not a problem with gay people or trans people, but instead with far-left extremists. However, I do want to take a moment to have a look at the so-called context that has been so far provided to try to excuse people chanting, "We're coming for your children." That so-called context being that it's been done for years, that people at the parades have said far worse, and that it's being done to, quote, "fulfill their worst stereotypes." Not only does this completely fail to justify chanting, "We're coming for your children," but if anything, the additional context actively makes it worse. This proves beyond any doubt that no, it's not just one random weirdo. It's a reoccurring problem. It's a reoccurring problem that has even worse to compete with, according to the parade attendees. And on top of all of that, the attendees are admitting that they are outright trying to fulfill the worst stereotypes. They are actively going out of their way to paint gay people and trans people in as negative a light as possible. This is them confessing that they are deliberately and knowingly doing everything they can to paint targets on the backs of gay and trans people. What absolute vile pieces of cancer these individuals are. But let's see how worse the article gets, shall we? As it then goes on to state, quote, "Conservative politicians and pundits have increasingly referred to advocates for LGBTQ rights as groomers, associating people who oppose laws that restrict drag performances or classroom discussions of gender identity with pedophiles. The charge is an echo of a decades-old trope anti-gay activists have used to paint the community as a threat to the country's youths, an allegation that some advocates say endangers LGBTQ people, and the intense reaction reaction to the video has scared some attendees who insist the quip has been taken out of context. So first of all, since this article likes talking about context so much, allow me to talk about the context of the laws that restrict drag performances or classroom discussions of gender identity, quote unquote. In the case of drag performances, the laws that are being put in place are there to restrict children from accessing these sexualized drag performances. And a question that these activists can never seem to answer is, why does a drag queen want an audience of children? A question that is very much worth asking given the circumstances. It's when it comes to the classroom discussions with regards to quote-unquote gender identity, though, that things truly take a turn for the even more horrific. I've already discussed this in a previous video, but the kinds of books and content that lawmakers are trying to prevent kids from getting access to can, with zero exaggeration, be considered pornographic in nature. As just one example, consider the book titled It's Perfectly Normal, which, as you can tell, is made for ages 10 and up. A book which contains this as one of its pages, which, as you can tell, includes several examples of acts of sexual intercourse. It's worth noting, by the way, that I've had to add the black bars myself, because otherwise this page from a children's book made for ages 10 and up would not be considered YouTube compliant. This is the sort of stuff that NBC News is passing off as just talking about sexual identity in the classroom. It is porn. They are deliberately trying to conflate porn to discussing gender identity. That is what this journalist is trying to defend, and how he is trying to dishonestly defend it. Anyways, to continue the article, it says, quote, "It's really scary to us," said Fussy Lo Mean, a drag performer and activist who was at this year's march and declined to give their real name because of safety concerns. "It doesn't represent everybody, it represents that individual. I thought it was a dumb idea, and I started chanting on top of it with alternate verses." So for what it's worth, I'll give this particular individual the benefit of the doubt, and say that since they seem to agree that it's a bad idea, and even outright tried to counter it, I'll at least say that this particular individual doesn't actually seem to be terrible. I will, however, have to disagree with them on this being not representative of the parade, given that others have tried to defend this chant by claiming that it's been done for years now, and with one of the founders of the parade itself trying to defend it by claiming that he has said far worse, therefore it's okay. Anyways, carrying on, the article then goes on to say, quote, "The video elicited outrage from right-wing pundits who called the marchers demonic and evil. GOP members of Congress tweeted that it showed legislation to outlaw gender-affirming care is warranted. And the Florida Republican Party claimed this is what the @FLA Dems want in Florida." So again, since this article likes talking about context so much, allow me to provide some additional context on the so-called gender-affirming care, and the laws that are meant to restrict it, specifically towards children, I should mention. As in children who are too young to drink, too young to vote, too young to work, too young to drive a car, but apparently are old enough to get a sex-changing surgery. A surgery that is not reversible. You know, just in case someone was mistaken about being trans and it turns out they weren't actually trans. This is the kind of stuff that this author is trying to defend as just gender-affirming care, and is trying to paint Republicans as immoral and evil for daring to have any issues whatsoever with it. And to be clear, I myself, and I suspect most people will agree with this when I say it, but I don't actually have a problem with a person getting the surgery as an adult. Key phrase being, as an adult. At this point, I've pretty much lost track of the number of lies and misinformation that's been spread in this article. But I am going to finish it, so let's go ahead and continue. So to carry on, the article says, quote, "An organizer for this year's drag march, known as Huckleberry Kin, who also performs in drag as Sister Lottie Da, declined an interview request, similarly citing fears for his safety in the light of the backlash over the clip. But he said in an email that the Coming for Your Children chant was a bad joke that is being used to serve the interests of parasitic, predatory political propaganda and policy." Now, to be fair, Huckleberry Kin is in fact correct in the claim that this joke is being used to serve the interests of a parasitic, predatory political propaganda and policy. It's just that the parasitic, predatory political propaganda and policy is coming from the Marxists in this situation. Because, as I've said, and as has been demonstrated by this article already, the Marxists in question are actively using gay and trans people as human shields for their ideology. They're deliberately trying to paint targets on the back of gay and trans people. So technically he is correct, though perhaps not in the way that he had intended. The article continues by saying, quote, "We won't tolerate harm towards any child and advocate for the protection and encouragement of every child to be able to live their true, authentic lives, free from fear and persecution," Huckleberry Finn said. The NYC Drag March, which starts in the East Village neighborhood of Manhattan and ends at the Stonewall Inn in the West Village, is a smaller and more provocative demonstration that is separate from the larger televised NYC Pride Parade that took place Sunday. Griffin, an activist who performs as Harmony Moore, organized the first NYC Drag March in 1994 in response to the organizers of Stonewall 25 demonstration, who asked people not to show up in drag or leather to make their event more palatable to certain communities. The Drag March is intended to push against the notion that the LGBTQ community needs to assimilate into heterosexual standards and is less serious than other Pride events. In other words, this entire parade was started because the Pride Parade itself didn't want these people around, specifically because they would give gay people a bad name. And so they decided to organize this parade to be as provocative and, in the process, give gay people as bad a name as possible. And now they're wondering why their provocative nature has, surprisingly, provoked people. It's a big mystery, isn't it? Anyways, the article then goes on to say, "It's fun. It's about performance," Griffin said. A leaderless group of activists with the Radical Fairies, a loose-knit LGBTQ collective, and the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, a charity and protest group, have helped organize the march in more recent years, according to HuffPost. There are no sponsorships by companies at the Drag March. Imagine being such absolutely horrific that no woke corporations would dare virtue signal by sponsoring your event. In this day and age, that says a hell of a lot. Anyways, to carry on, the article then goes on to say, quote, "We're here, we're queer, we're not going shopping" is a chant that has long been used by LGBTQ activists. At a 1990 march organized by ACT UP, a group that demanded more government resources to address the AIDS crisis, protesters chanted it as they walked around a downtown San Francisco shopping mall. The chant was also used by AIDS activists in Chicago demonstrations in the 1990s. According to multiple Drag March regulars, the "Coming for Your Children" variation has been used before. Last year, Gothamist reported people at the Drag March chanted, "10% is not enough, groom, groom, groom." Keep in mind, this article is actively trying to defend that behavior. And oh boy, is it failing spectacularly, because the moment it provides quotes like that, it completely destroys the argument that it is trying to make. Anyways, the article then goes on to say, quote, "Carla Jay, the first female chair of New York's Gay Liberation Front, and a professor emerita at Pace University, said it's a strategy to take the sting out of accusations lobbied against the LGBTQ community. A strategy which I think we can all agree has failed spectacularly, were that actually the intent." Anyways, she says, quote, "I grew up in the time where it was considered really bad to be called gay or lesbian or anything like that. And what we did is we reclaimed words," she said. "Think of the Dyke March. These were words that could not be printed. Chants at Pride marches," Jay said, "are usually meant more for the compatriots in the crowd, not for people watching later on video. The person who said this in a march isn't the person who came up with this idea. The person in the march is saying, 'Go ahead, call me this. Why do I care?'" She continued, "The person is trying to destigmatize this and claim their own power. You can't blame the victims here, and that's what the right wing is doing." Okay, so first of all, she claims that this chant is not meant for people watching later on video, yet she contradicts herself by claiming that this message is addressed to people who would call this person a groomer, saying that you can go ahead and call them that because what do they care? So it's simultaneously meant only for members of the crowd and not people who are against the crowd, and yet is addressed to people who are opposed to the crowd. So like I said, this is a completely contradictory statement. But what really annoys me about this particular passage is the fact that she tries to claim that the person who made that statement is somehow the victim of this story. Because, oh no, they claimed that they were a groomer and people decided to take them at their word for it. And were somehow not allowed to criticize this person when their actions directly brought this upon themselves. If you're going to shout loud and proud that you're coming for people's kids, then don't be surprised when people come to the conclusion that you're coming for their kids. That's a situation you entirely created, and you deserve to be blamed for it. The people who don't deserve to be blamed for it are people who happen to be gay or trans that want no part of these activists. But unfortunately, and as I've explained multiple times now, these activists are Marxists who are deliberately trying to use trans and gay people as human shields. In other words, the marcher who said that wasn't a victim, he was a victimizer. Anyways, to finish off this article, it then goes on to say, quote, "Photos of this year's march show on social media people with signs reading 'Groom sissies' and 'Trans, your greatest fear, your biggest fantasy.' These are the words that they've used all our lives to manipulate and control us," Griffin said. "And now we can own them and see them for the falsehoods that they are, by doing absolutely everything in your power to make them seem completely legitimate and accurate." As you can probably tell, I'm not exactly a huge fan of this article, nor am I a huge fan of the horrific things that it tries to defend, like as we've mentioned earlier, giving porn to kids. And I suspect that I have made that very, very clear during my read of this article as well. That said, I also hope that I have made it clear that it is not actually gay or trans people that are the problem. Instead, the problem is Marxism as an ideology, and for reasons that I've already explained. Now, for those curious, I will of course be leaving a link in the description below to an archive of this article so you can check it out for yourself if you should so desire. But in any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.